Let's talk about Japan. Not the Japan of cherry blossoms and anime and the inexplicable vending machine that sells hot canned coffee next to cold canned coffee next to a vending machine that sells umbrellas, although all of that is real and wonderful and genuinely worth a separate video. This video is about a different Japan, the Japan that has one of the highest life expectancies on the planet. The Japan where people in their 80s are still running small businesses with the energy of someone who didn't get the memo about retirement. The Japan where the concept of wasting something, anything, money included, produces a specific cultural discomfort that has no real equivalent in the Western financial vocabulary. The Japan where financial habits that most of the Western world treats as advanced concepts are so embedded in the culture that children learn them before they learn multiplication. Here's the thing about Japanese financial habits that makes them worth an entire video. They work. Not in the theoretical, sounds good in a book way, in the specific, documented, statistically verifiable way that produces outcomes. Japan has one of the highest household savings rates among developed economies. Japanese households consistently demonstrate financial resilience that absorbs economic shocks. And Japan has had some genuinely spectacular economic shocks over the past 30 years without the catastrophic personal financial consequences that similar shocks produce in lower savings cultures. The average Japanese household's relationship with money, debt, quality, and long-term thinking produces financial outcomes that the average Western household's relationship with those same things doesn't approach. And here's the part that makes this video actionable rather than just interesting. The habits that produce these outcomes are not products of a specific economic system, a specific tax structure, or a specific set of circumstances that only exist in Japan. They are cognitive and behavioral practices, ways of thinking about money, time, quality, and consumption that are entirely portable. You don't need to move to Tokyo. You need to understand what the practices are, why they work, and how to implement them in the specific financial context of your own life. That's what this video is going to give you. 7 Japanese habits, some with specific Japanese names, some with philosophical frameworks that have no direct English equivalent, some that look deceptively simple until you understand the compound financial effect they produce, that, implemented consistently over time, produce the specific wealth outcomes that these practices have been generating in Japan for generations. Some of these will be familiar in concept but radical in their level of implementation. Some will be genuinely new frameworks that change how specific financial decisions feel from the inside. At least one will make you look at an object in your home differently than you've ever looked at it before. Let's start. Chapter 1. Kakeibo. The ancient Japanese art of saving money by writing everything down. Yes, by hand. Here's the first Japanese financial habit, and it is going to immediately provoke an objection from approximately 70% of the people watching this video. Kakeibo, the Japanese household budgeting system that involves writing your finances down by hand in a physical notebook, rather than using an app, a spreadsheet, or any of the 17 budgeting tools currently available on your smartphone. The objection is already forming. We have technology for this. There are apps that link directly to your bank accounts, categorize every transaction automatically, generate charts that show your spending patterns in 4 colors, and send you notifications when you're approaching a budget limit. Why would anyone use a notebook? Because the notebook works better, and the reason it works better is not sentimental or technophobic. It is psychological and neurological, and it produces specific financial outcomes that the automated app version of the same information doesn't produce. What kakeibo actually is kakeibo, pronounced kakeibo, which literally translates to household finance ledger, was invented in 1904 by Hani Motoko, Japan's first female journalist, who published it as a practical household management tool. The fact that a system invented in 1904 is still actively used and still produces financial results in 2026 tells you something important about whether its value is dependent on technology. The kakeibo system organizes financial life around 4 questions that are asked at the beginning of each month and reviewed at the end of it. How much money do you have available this month? How much do you want to save? How much did you actually spend? How can you improve next month? These 4 questions sound almost insultingly simple until you sit down to answer. them honestly and discover that most people cannot answer all four accurately without the specific exercise of writing down and reviewing every financial transaction of the preceding month. The monthly practice consists of recording every income and every expense by hand, organized into 4 spending categories: needs, food, housing, utilities, transportation; wants, entertainment, dining out; hobbies, discretionary spending; culture, books, educational materials; experiences that develop knowledge or skill; unexpected, the expenses that weren't planned and that reveal the gaps in the budget's anticipation of reality. At the end of the month, the 4 questions are answered with actual data rather than estimates, and the gap between the savings goal and the actual savings is confronted directly. Why the handwriting matters. Here's the psychological mechanism that makes kakeibo more financially effective than the automated digital equivalent. The specific reason that writing by hand produces different outcomes than viewing automatically generated reports. The act of physically writing a number engages the brain differently than reading the same number on a screen. Research on handwriting versus typing consistently shows that handwritten information is processed more deeply, encoded more thoroughly, and retained more reliably than the same information typed or viewed. The neural engagement of physically forming each digit in a financial record creates a more durable cognitive impression of the financial reality being recorded. The practical consequence: the person who writes down that they spent $340 on dining last month has a more visceral, more emotionally real experience of that $340 than the person who sees the same number in a green bar on a budgeting app's chart. The written number is connected to the physical act of recording every individual transaction that produced it: the $12 lunch, the $45 dinner, the $28 delivery fee that felt small and added up large. The chart number is the aggregate of transactions that were experienced but never individually registered. The emotional reality of the written financial record is what produces the behavioral change that the automated report often doesn't. The person who has written down every food delivery charge for a month has experienced each one twice, once when they ordered and once when they wrote it down, and the second experience, in the retrospective context of the month's full financial picture, produces a genuinely different emotional evaluation than the first. The 4 questions as a monthly ritual. Here's the specific practice of kakeibo that produces the most significant behavioral change. The monthly ritual of the 4 questions, which transforms budgeting from a tracking exercise into a reflective practice. The first question, how much money do you have available this month, forces a specific assessment of income that most people have as a rough figure, but few have as the specific number from which all subsequent planning derives. The specific number, after taxes, after any automatic deductions, the actual amount that will land in the account this month. The second question, how much do you want to save, forces a specific savings commitment before the month's spending begins, rather than a passive hope that something will remain after the spending is done. The kakeibo approach inverts the conventional saving from leftovers pattern by establishing the savings target first and treating it as the first allocation from income rather than the last. The amount available for spending is income minus the savings commitment, not income, with saving being whatever survives the spending. The third question, how much did you actually spend, is answered at month's end from the complete written record. The gap between the planned spending and the actual spending, revealed specifically and categorically, is the information that produces genuine learning rather than the general sense that spending was high, but the categories where it was high are unclear. The fourth question, how can you improve next month, converts the retrospective review into forward-looking intention. Not, I spent too much on dining as a judgment, but next month, I will bring lunch 3 days per week and limit delivery to once per week, as a specific, actionable commitment. The specificity is the difference between insight that produces behavior change and insight that produces temporary regret. The savings rate. Kakeibo produces. Here's the documented financial outcome of consistent kakeibo practice that justifies its inclusion as the first habit on this list. The average household that practices kakeibo consistently reports saving 10% to 35% of their monthly income, not because they earn more, not because they've eliminated all enjoyment from their financial lives, but because the specific. Visibility and the monthly reflection produce spending adjustments that accumulate into significant savings over time. The mechanism is not willpower, it is awareness. Most people who don't practice any form of deliberate financial tracking significantly underestimate their spending in most categories and significantly overestimate their savings rate. The kakeibo record eliminates this self-serving miscalibration by replacing estimates with data, and the data, written by hand, reviewed monthly, compared to stated intentions, produces the specific behavioral adjustments that the data's absence would have prevented. The specific kakeibo practice to start: buy a small notebook. Dedicate the first page to the month's 4 questions. Record every transaction every day, by hand, in ink, in the notebook, for 1 month. Answer all 4 questions at month's end with the actual data. The first month's review will teach you more about your financial habits than any amount of reading about financial habits ever could. Chapter 2: Ikigai and the Long Game. How finding your reason for being becomes your most powerful wealth strategy. Here's the second Japanese habit, and it's the one that will be most surprising on a list of wealth-building practices because it has nothing explicitly to do with money, savings, investment, or any of the conventional financial categories, and everything to do with the specific motivation architecture that makes all the other wealth-building practices sustainable over the long term. Ikigai, pronounced ikigai, a Japanese concept that translates approximately to reason for being, or the thing that makes getting up in the morning worthwhile. A concept that has been described in hundreds of books and that is often reduced to a Venn diagram, showing the intersection of what you love, what you're good at, what the world needs, and what you can be paid for. The Venn diagram is useful but incomplete as a description of what Ikigai actually is and how it functions in the financial lives of the Japanese people who embody it most fully. This chapter is about the specific financial consequences of having or not having a genuine Ikigai, and why the financial outcomes of Ikigai-oriented people are systematically different from the financial outcomes of people operating without one. The career without Ikigai, the expensive alternative. Here's the financial cost of the most common alternative to Ikigai, the career or work life that is organized primarily around compensation rather than around meaning, purpose, and genuine engagement. The compensation-first career is not irrational. The income it generates is real and important, but it produces a specific set of financial behaviors that systematically work against wealth accumulation. Behaviors that are not coincidental, but are the predictable consequence of using income-generating work as the primary vehicle for meaning-seeking rather than for what it actually is. The first behavior, compensatory spending. The person who derives minimal genuine satisfaction from their work frequently compensates for that dissatisfaction through consumption. The reward meal after a difficult week, the weekend purchase that provides temporary relief from the weekday grind, the vacation that is necessary to recover from the work that funds it. This spending pattern is not laziness or financial irresponsibility. It is the rational response of someone who needs to find their daily value and satisfaction somewhere and who has found it in consumption because their work is not providing it. The financial cost of compensatory spending is significant and persistent. The person spending $500 per month on consumption that is primarily functioning as compensation for work dissatisfaction is spending $6,000 per year, $60,000 over a decade, on a problem that Ikigai-oriented work would solve without the expenditure. The person who genuinely likes what they do doesn't need to compensate for it. The absence of the compensatory spending is a direct financial benefit of the Ikigai orientation. The second behavior, career stagnation from disengagement. The person who finds minimal genuine engagement in their work is less likely to pursue the deep skill development, the creative problem solving, and the relationship investment that produce the income growth that wealth accumulation requires. Disengagement produces maintenance-level performance rather than the growth-oriented performance that generates career advancement, salary increases, and the kind of professional reputation that creates financial optionality. How Ikigai changes the financial trajectory. Here's the specific mechanism through which genuine Ikigai, not the simplified Venn diagram version, but the actual lived experience of work that feels meaningful and engaging, produces better long-term financial outcomes. The ikigai-oriented worker invests in their craft continuously, not because a performance review requires it, but because genuine engagement with meaningful work naturally produces the desire to do it better. This continuous investment generates compound improvement in capability over years and decades that produces a professional trajectory, income growth, reputation development, opportunity access, that the disengaged worker's maintenance-level performance doesn't approach. The ikigai-oriented worker has a different relationship with career risk. The person who genuinely loves what they do is more willing to make the career moves, the skill investments, the entrepreneurial risks that produce the income growth that wealth accumulation is built on. Because the downside of those risks is landing in work they still genuinely care about. The person whose work is purely a means to income is more risk-averse in career decisions because the work itself offers no cushion beyond the compensation. Any disruption is a pure loss. The ikigai-oriented worker often works longer and more productively than the retirement-focused worker, not because they lack financial independence goals, but because their work remains genuinely rewarding past the age at which the disengaged worker would accept any financial terms to stop. The Japanese concept of working with purpose past conventional retirement age is not a product of economic necessity in the cases of the most admired practitioners. It is a product of genuinely meaningful work that produces genuine satisfaction regardless of age. The Japanese centenarians and what they have in common. Here's the specific demographic evidence that ikigai is not merely a philosophical concept, but a documented feature of the longest-lived, most financially resilient population segment. The Japanese centenarians, particularly those in the blue zone regions of Okinawa, consistently cite some version of ikigai when asked about the source of their longevity and their continued engagement with life. The Okinawan concept most closely related to ikigai is the daily reason to get up. The morning motivation that pulls a person out of bed, not because obligations require it, but because something genuinely interesting and genuinely meaningful awaits. The farmers who continue farming into their 80s because they love the land and the process. The craftspeople who continue their craft because the craft is not separable from who they are. The community figures who continue their community involvement because the relationships and contributions are their source of daily meaning. The financial consequences of this orientation are specific and measurable: lower healthcare costs through better physical and mental health outcomes, lower consumption spending through lower reliance on consumption as a meaning substitute, higher lifetime income through longer productive careers, greater financial resilience through genuine engagement with productive activity that can generate income when needed, rather than a fixed employment relationship that either exists or doesn't. Finding your ikigai. The practical starting point. Here's the honest acknowledgement that ikigai is not a concept you implement in an afternoon. It is a direction of inquiry that may take months or years of honest exploration to develop, alongside the specific starting points that make the inquiry productive rather than perpetually abstract. The 4 questions that the ikigai framework provides as starting points: what do you genuinely love? Not what you think you should love, not what impressed people when you mentioned it, but what you actually find yourself drawn to when no one is watching and no outcome is expected. What are you genuinely good at? Not modestly? Not performatively? What does the evidence of your performance over time suggest you have real capability for? What does the world need that connects to? Those first 2? Not in the grand geopolitical sense, but in the specific sense of what problems, what services, what contributions can be traced back to the intersection of your genuine interest and genuine capability, and what can you be paid for within that intersection. The intersection of all 4 is not always immediately obvious. Many people find it through iteration, trying things, paying attention to what feels engaging rather than what looks impressive, following the genuine curiosity that most professional environments have trained them to suppress in favor of the currently valued skill set. The wealth-building implication of finding this intersection. Every hour spent working in genuine alignment with ikigai is an hour that is simultaneously building financial value, developing professional capability, and producing the genuine satisfaction that eliminates the compensatory spending that the absence of ikigai requires. The financial return on the ikigai-aligned career, measured over a full working life, is one of the highest returning investments available. Chapter 3. Mottainai, the philosophy of waste. That changes everything about how you spend money. Here's the 3rd Japanese habit: and it is the one that will change how you look at an object you currently own before this chapter is over. Not because this video has a magic trick up its sleeve, but because the philosophy it describes produces a specific perceptual shift that, once experienced, is difficult to unexperience. Mottainai, pronounced mottainai, a Japanese concept that translates approximately to "what a waste," an expression of regret for the waste of something of value that has no direct single-word equivalent in English, which is itself significant. The absence of a word for a concept in a language reflects the relative absence of that concept in the culture. English doesn't have a single word for the specific regret of waste because the cultural weight of waste avoidance that requires such a word is less present in English-speaking cultures than in Japanese culture. The mottainai philosophy encompasses 4 R's that the Western sustainability movement has partially adopted, but that in the Japanese context extend far beyond environmental consideration into the daily financial practice of every household. Reduce, reuse, recycle, and respect. Specifically, the respect for the value inherent in objects, materials, and resources that makes their waste feel genuinely regrettable, rather than merely inconvenient. The financial cost of the throwaway orientation. Here's the specific financial cost of the cultural alternative to mottainai, the throwaway orientation that has become the default in most Western consumer economies, stated in terms that make the contrast between the two approaches financially concrete. The throwaway orientation treats objects as disposable, as things whose value is primarily in their novelty, whose useful life ends not when they stop functioning, but when they stop being new or fashionable, and whose replacement is preferable to the investment of repair. This orientation is actively promoted by the consumer economy because it maximizes consumption volume. The faster objects are discarded and replaced, the more objects are sold. The financial cost to the individual household of the throwaway orientation is enormous and largely invisible because it operates at the level of countless small decisions rather than any single large one. The appliance replaced rather than repaired. The clothing item discarded because it's out of style rather than worn until it wears out. The furniture replaced to match a new aesthetic rather than maintained for its functional life. The electronics upgraded because the new model exists rather than because the current model has stopped serving its purpose. The aggregate annual cost of the throwaway orientation for the average household. The spending on replacement that the mottainai practicing household avoids is difficult to calculate precisely because it is distributed across dozens of spending categories, but estimates in the personal finance literature suggest it is in the range of $5,000 to $15,000 per year for a typical middle-income household. Invested consistently over 30 years at historical average returns, this annual difference represents a portfolio difference of $500,000 to $1,500,000. The philosophy of not wasting things is, in financial terms, one of the highest returning habits available. Mottainai in practice. What it actually looks like. Here's what the mottainai philosophy looks like in the daily practice of households that embody it. The specific behaviors that translate the philosophical orientation into financial outcomes. The first practice is repair before replacement, the Japanese concept of kintsugi, the art of repairing broken pottery with gold, making the repair itself a feature rather than a flaw, is the aesthetic expression of a broader cultural orientation toward repair as a worthy and even beautiful response to damage. The household appliance that stops working is repaired if repair is economically rational, not replaced by default. The clothing item that wears through is mended. The piece of furniture that needs refinishing is refinished. The electronic device that develops a fixable fault is fixed. The financial logic of repair before replacement is straightforward, but is not instinctively applied in the throwaway culture. The question is not, is it broken? Which leads automatically to replacement, but what would it cost to fix it? And how does that compare to the cost of replacement and the remaining useful life of the item if repaired? This calculation, made honestly, frequently produces the repair decision rather than the replacement decision, and the cumulative financial effect of consistently making the repair decision is significant. The second practice is complete use before discard. The mottainai household uses things fully before discarding them. The food that is consumed rather than wasted, the clothing that is worn until it is genuinely worn out rather than until it is unfashionable, the product that is used to its last application before a new one is opened. This sounds obvious. The financial reality of most households suggests it is not practiced with the consistency that produces meaningful savings. Food waste alone in the average American household represents approximately $1,500 per year of purchased food that is discarded uneaten. The mottainai approach to food, planning meals to use what is purchased, using ingredients fully before buying more, treating the near-empty refrigerator as a creative challenge rather than an automatic shopping trigger, eliminates most of this waste and redirects the money toward wealth accumulation. The object relationship shift. Here's the specific perceptual shift that the mottainai philosophy produces in the people who genuinely internalize it. The changed relationship with objects that this chapter promised would occur before its end. In the throwaway orientation, objects are experienced primarily as consumer products, things that were purchased, that serve a current purpose, and that will eventually be replaced. Their relationship to the household is transactional and temporary. They are commodities. In the mottainai orientation, objects are experienced as resources with inherent value, things that represent the labor, materials, and energy that went into their creation, that deserve to be used fully, maintained carefully, and passed on or repurposed rather than wasted. This shift in how objects are experienced changes the decision-making around them at every stage. The purchase decision, because something that will be maintained and used fully deserves more careful selection than something that will be replaced casually. The maintenance decision, because something with inherent value deserves the investment of care that extends its useful life. The disposal decision, because something with inherent value should be redirected to a new use rather than simply discarded when the current use is complete. The financial consequence of this shifted relationship with objects is the reduction of both the volume and the cost of consumption. Fewer things purchased more carefully, maintained more thoroughly, and used more fully produces spending that is lower per unit of genuine utility than the throwaway orientation's higher volume, lower care pattern. The mottainai investment in quality. Here's the specific spending philosophy that the mottainai orientation produces. A spending philosophy that is counterintuitive from the frugality angle, but financially superior to cheap and replace in the long run. The deliberate investment in quality items that last rather than cheap items that don't. The mottainai practitioner spends more per item on the things they buy, because the item that is maintained and used for 10 years at a higher upfront cost is cheaper per year of use than the item that costs half as much but requires replacement every 2 years, the quality tool that lasts a lifetime, the well-made garment that outlasts 6 cheaper alternatives, the durable appliance that costs more upfront and requires no replacement for 15 years. This is the financial logic that Japanese craft culture, the extraordinary precision and quality of Japanese manufacturing, the attention to longevity and repairability in product design, embodies, and that the mottainai philosophy at the household level reflects. Quality is not extravagance. In a long-term financial analysis, quality that enables full use and extended life is often the cheaper option. The framing of quality as expensive and cheap as economical is the throwaway culture's specific distortion of the long-term financial reality. The specific mottainai practice to implement immediately. Before your next replacement purchase, ask whether the item being replaced could be repaired and what the repair would cost. Ask whether the item being replaced truly cannot serve its function, or whether it has simply reached the aesthetic expiration date that the throwaway culture assigns to all objects. Ask whether the replacement being considered is the highest quality option available within budget, the one that will last and be maintained, or the cheapest option that will eventually require re-replacement. These 3 questions, applied consistently, produce the specific financial behavior that the mottainai philosophy generates, and the specific wealth accumulation that financial behavior generates over time. Chapter 4. Kaizen. The continuous improvement philosophy that makes getting rich inevitable. Here's the 4th Japanese habit, and it's the one that has been most extensively studied, most widely written about, and most consistently misapplied by the Western businesses and individuals who encountered it and immediately tried to scale it into something dramatic rather than applying it the way it actually works, which is quietly, modestly, daily, and with the patient confidence that small improvements compound into large outcomes. Kaizen, pronounced kaizen, translated literally as change for better. The philosophy of continuous improvement through small, consistent incremental steps rather than dramatic overhauls and revolutionary transformations. The concept was developed in Japanese manufacturing in the post-World War II period, most famously applied at Toyota, where it became the foundation of what the world now calls the Toyota production system. And it produced one of the most remarkable manufacturing turnarounds in industrial history, not through a single dramatic innovation, but through the relentless accumulation of thousands of small improvements over decades. The reason Kaizen belongs on a list of Japanese wealth-building habits is not because building wealth is like manufacturing cars. It is because the specific psychological and mathematical mechanisms that make Kaizen work in manufacturing are identical to the mechanisms that make it work in personal finance. And because the cultural instinct toward continuous incremental improvement that Kaizen represents is one of the most financially powerful orientations available, and one of the least glamorous, which is exactly why it is consistently underestimated. The 1% improvement that changes everything. Here's the mathematical foundation of the Kaizen approach to wealth building, the specific calculation that transforms the modest-seeming commitment to continuous small improvement into a genuinely significant financial outcome. A 1% improvement per week compounded over a year produces a 68% improvement from the starting point, not a 52% improvement, which is what 1% times 52 weeks would produce in linear arithmetic, a 68% improvement, because each week's improvement is built on the previous week's improved base rather than on the original starting point. The compounding of small improvements is a mathematical phenomenon as powerful as the compounding of investment returns, operating on a different variable, capability, behavior, efficiency, rather than on money. Applied to financial behavior, the Kaizen approach means not trying to overhaul the entire financial life in a single dramatic commitment. The resolution to save 30% starting Monday, to cut all discretionary spending simultaneously, to completely restructure the investment portfolio this weekend, but instead making one specific small sustainable improvement per week or per month and compounding those improvements over time. The savings rate that increases by 1% per month, from 10% to 11% to 12% and so on, reaches 22% in a year, without any single month's increase being dramatic enough to produce the resistance that dramatic changes generate. The investment knowledge that grows by one concept per week, 1 hour of reading, one concept understood, one implementation decision made, becomes genuinely sophisticated over a year of consistent accumulation. The income that grows by finding one small optimization per month, one negotiation, one skill addition, one inefficiency eliminated, generates a compounding income improvement that the single dramatic career move doesn't reliably produce. Why Kaizen works. When dramatic change doesn't. Here's the specific psychological mechanism that makes the Kaizen approach to financial improvement more reliable than the dramatic overhaul approach that most personal finance content implicitly promotes, because understanding the mechanism is what allows you to apply it deliberately rather than hoping that discipline alone sustains dramatic commitments. Dramatic financial commitments, the decision to save 40% starting now, to invest every spare dollar, to eliminate all non-essential spending simultaneously, activate a specific psychological resistance mechanism that behavioral economists call reactance, the motivated resistance to rules and constraints that feel externally imposed or excessively restrictive. When a behavior change feels sufficiently constraining, the psychological response is not compliance, but resistance, the specific motivation to recover the lost freedom that manifests as the binge after the diet, the spending splurge after the savings period, the dramatic abandonment of the financial plan that was too ambitious to sustain. Small improvements don't trigger reactance because they don't feel like constraints. Adding $50 per month to the investment contribution doesn't feel like deprivation. Cutting one subscription doesn't feel like austerity. Reading one financial book per month doesn't feel like homework. None of these feel significant enough to trigger the resistance that significant feeling commitments trigger. And because they don't trigger resistance, they sustain. and sustained small improvements compound into large outcomes in ways that unsustained dramatic commitments never produce. The specific Japanese cultural expression of this principle in financial contexts is the practice of incremental saving, gradually increasing the savings rate over time rather than attempting to jump to a target rate immediately. The household that increases its savings rate by 1 percentage point per quarter is at a 4% higher savings rate in a year, having made no single adjustment that produced financial stress. The household that attempts to increase its savings rate by 15% in a single month and fails at month 3 has produced no lasting change, despite the dramatic commitment. The Kaizen application to income growth. Here's the specific application of the Kaizen philosophy to the income side of the wealth building equation, the one that most Kaizen content applied to personal finance misses because it focuses primarily on the expense side. Income growth through Kaizen looks like the deliberate, systematic, incremental development of the skills and capabilities that produce income. The one skill per month added, the one professional relationship per month developed, the one new capability per quarter demonstrated and compensated for, rather than the leap to a dramatically different income level through a single career move. The compound effect of systematic skill development over years is one of the most underappreciated wealth-building mechanisms available. The professional who adds one meaningful skill per quarter over a 5-year period has added 20 skills to their professional profile. And the value of those skills is not additive, but multiplicative, because the unique combinations they enable command premium compensation that any individual skill alone wouldn't generate. The Kaizen income development practice looks like this in specific terms. Identify the single skill that would most increase your income if added to your current profile. Invest 1 hour per day in developing it. Demonstrate it in a low-stakes context to confirm the development. Identify the next skill after the first is established. Repeat. The person who has followed this practice for 5 years has not had a career makeover. They have had a career compounding, an incremental, continuous growth that produces an income at year 5 that the year 0 version of themselves would not have been able to predict. Kaizen for investments. The regular review practice. Here's the application of the Kaizen philosophy to the investment portfolio. The specific practice of regular incremental review and improvement that produces better investment outcomes than the dramatic portfolio overhaul or the complete set-and-forget approach. The Kaizen investment practice is the regular review, monthly or quarterly, that asks one specific question. What is the single most important improvement to the investment portfolio or investment strategy that could be made in the next period? Not a comprehensive overhaul, one improvement. The improvement might be reducing the expense ratio of one holding by switching to a lower cost equivalent. It might be increasing the allocation to one asset class that has drifted below its target. It might be adding one new account type, opening the HSA that hasn't been opened, starting the Roth IRA conversion that has been planned, establishing the taxable brokerage account that will serve as the bridge to early retirement. It might be reviewing and updating the beneficiary designations that haven't been checked in 2 years. Each individual improvement is modest. The accumulation of 12 such improvements per year over a decade is a portfolio that has been continuously refined toward optimal structure, lower cost, better diversified, more tax efficient, more aligned with the current financial situation, without any single review session producing the overwhelming feeling of comprehensive portfolio management. The Kaizen investment review takes approximately 30 minutes per month. The compound benefit of 30 minutes per month of genuine improvement over a decade is a portfolio that has been given 12 hours per year of thoughtful attention rather than the periodic panicked overhaul or the permanent neglect that characterize most individual investors' portfolio management. The Kaizen daily financial habit. Here's the specific daily practice that brings the Kaizen philosophy into the financial routine at the most granular level. The 1-minute financial practice that, performed daily, produces significant awareness and improvement over time. The practice is this. At the end of each day, spend 60 seconds asking one question about the day's financial behavior, not a comprehensive review. One question. What was today's most significant financial decision? Was it the right decision given the financial goals? What would a 1% improvement to that decision have looked like? The daily 1-minute practice does 3 things that the weekly or monthly review alone doesn't provide. It keeps the financial goal in daily conscious awareness, a necessary condition for making decisions that are aligned with it. It develops the habit of evaluating financial decisions against the goal rather than against the immediate desire, and it generates a continuous stream of specific, small improvement insights that weekly or monthly review would aggregate rather than preserve in their individual specificity. The person who has asked this daily question for a year has generated 365 specific observations about their financial decision-making, a dataset of self-knowledge that no external assessment can provide and that produces the specific, personalized improvements that generic financial advice doesn't. Chapter 5. Hara Hachibu, the eating principle that accidentally became the most powerful anti-consumerism tool available. Here's the 5th Japanese habit, and it's the one that will initially seem most out of place on a list of wealth-building practices because it is, on its surface, about food, specifically about eating, more specifically about stopping eating before you're full. Bear with this, because the connection between a Japanese eating principle and long-term wealth creation is specific, documented, and more financially significant than it appears from the description. Hara Hachibu, pronounced Ha-ra-ha-chi-bu, a Confucian teaching that is deeply embedded in Okinawan culture, the culture that has produced the world's highest concentration of centenarians, which translates approximately to eat until you are 80% full. The practice is to stop eating when you are satisfied, rather than when you are stuffed, to leave the table with a comfortable sufficiency rather than the maximum possible intake. The health benefits of Hara Hachibu are well documented and not the primary subject of this chapter. The principle reduces caloric intake by 20% on average, which produces specific and significant health outcomes that contribute to the longevity of the Okinawan population. What is less documented and more interesting for this video's purposes is the financial application of the same principle, the specific way that the 80% satisfaction rule, applied to consumption broadly rather than just to eating, becomes one of the most powerful anti-consumerism and wealth-building orientations available. The 80% rule applied to consumption. Here's the specific extension of the Hara Hachibu principle from eating to consumption generally, the application that produces direct financial consequences. Most consumption in the modern consumer economy is not driven by genuine need or even by genuine want, in the sense of a desire that pre-existed exposure to the product. It is driven by the cultural and marketing pressure to consume at the maximum available level, to have the newest, the largest, the most upgraded version of everything that income allows. The person earning $100,000 per year is surrounded by cultural pressure to live at the $100,000 lifestyle rather than at the $70,000 lifestyle, to spend at capacity rather than at sufficiency. The Hara Hachibu approach to consumption challenges this maximum consumption orientation with the specific question, am I consuming at the level that produces genuine satisfaction, or am I consuming at the maximum level that income permits? For the person earning $100,000 per year, genuine satisfaction may be achievable at $70,000 in annual spending, leaving $30,000 per year for wealth accumulation, without any meaningful reduction in actual well-being. The additional $30,000 in spending is not producing proportional additional satisfaction. It is filling the financial capacity to consume rather than a genuine satisfaction gap. The research on consumption and happiness consistently supports this observation. Beyond a specific threshold, widely cited as approximately $75,000 to $100,000 in annual household income in the United States, additional income spent on consumption produces diminishing and eventually negligible returns in life satisfaction. The person spending $150,000 per year is not, on average, meaningfully happier than the person spending $80,000. The $70,000 difference is not producing $70,000 worth of genuine satisfaction. It is filling the financial plate. The Hara Hachibu approach to spending recognizes this satiation dynamic and deliberately stops consuming before the financial plate is full, leaving the capacity for wealth accumulation that consuming to capacity would eliminate, the satiation threshold exercise. Here's the specific practice that applies the harahachi-bu principle to personal spending, the exercise that identifies the specific level of consumption at which genuine satisfaction is achieved rather than the maximum level that income permits. The exercise involves reviewing the spending categories in the household budget and asking, for each category, what level of spending in this category produces genuine satisfaction, the feeling that this need or want is genuinely met, versus what level of spending would exhaust the budget allocated to it. The housing category: is the current housing genuinely satisfying, or is it the maximum that the budget permits? Is there a meaningful satisfaction gap between the current situation and the next level up? Or is the desire for something better primarily driven by comparison with others rather than by genuine dissatisfaction with what is adequate? The honest answer to this question, applied to housing, transportation, food, clothing, entertainment, and every other significant spending category, typically reveals that genuine satisfaction is achievable at 70% to 80% of the maximum that income permits in most categories. The gap between genuine satisfaction spending and maximum income spending is the specific space that the harahachi-bu wealth-building practice opens up, and filling that space with investment rather than consumption is the specific financial behavior that the principle produces. The accumulation resistance. Here's the application of the harahachi-bu principle to physical accumulation, the number of objects in the home, that connects this chapter to the mottainai philosophy of the previous chapter, and that produces specific financial consequences. The 80% principle applied to physical accumulation suggests stopping the acquisition of objects before the home reaches its full capacity to contain them, maintaining a deliberate sufficiency of possessions rather than filling available space to capacity. This practice has direct financial consequences through the channels already discussed in the mottainai chapter: reduced consumption spending, reduced replacement spending, and the specific financial efficiency of having fewer, better things rather than more, cheaper things. It also has an indirect financial consequence through the psychological freedom that reduced physical accumulation produces. The person whose home is full of objects they don't fully use, don't particularly value, and haven't thought about recently has a specific ambient psychological weight, the subconscious awareness of the accumulated obligations of ownership, that reduces mental clarity in ways that affect financial decision-making. The person whose home contains what they genuinely use and value has a psychological freedom from that accumulation weight that contributes to the clearer thinking that better financial decisions require. The lifestyle inflation vaccine. Here's the most financially significant application of the harahachi-bu principle: its function as a vaccine against lifestyle inflation. The specific wealth-destroying pattern of automatically increasing spending as income increases, which prevents wealth accumulation at every income level. Lifestyle inflation is the financial equivalent of eating more food simply because more food is on the plate, consuming more because consumption capacity has increased rather than because genuine satisfaction requires more. The person whose income increases by $20,000 per year and whose spending automatically increases by $20,000 per year has consumed the entire income growth without directing any of it toward wealth accumulation. The lifestyle plate has been filled to the new capacity. The harahachi-bu approach to income increases is the specific practice of directing a deliberate percentage of every income increase toward wealth accumulation before the lifestyle adjusts to expect the full amount. The practice treats income growth not as the signal to expand consumption to the new capacity, but as the opportunity to increase the gap between genuine satisfaction spending and maximum capacity spending, a gap that was already producing some wealth accumulation at the previous income level, and that the income growth can expand. The specific implementation: for every income increase, direct at least 50% to wealth accumulation before any lifestyle adjustment is made. The remaining 50% can fund the genuine lifestyle improvements that the higher income genuinely enables: the better food, the more comfortable housing, the experiences that produce real satisfaction. But the automatic direction of at least half of every income increase to investment before lifestyle inflation can claim it is the harahachi-bu approach applied to the financial growth trajectory. Chapter 6. Shokunin. The master craftsperson mentality that generates premium income for life. Here's the sixth Japanese habit: one that has been the foundation of Japan's extraordinary reputation for quality manufacturing, precision craftsmanship, and the specific category of products and services that command premium prices globally because they are demonstrably superior to everything else available in their category. Shokunin, pronounced shokunin, translated approximately as craftsperson or artisan, but the translation significantly understates the concept, because shokunin in Japanese culture is not merely a job description, it is an identity, a philosophy, and a specific orientation toward work that produces outcomes of such consistent quality that the work itself becomes a form of excellence rather than simply a means to income. The shokunin is the ramen chef who has been perfecting a single bowl of ramen for 30 years and who still believes there is room for improvement. The knife maker whose blades are used in the finest kitchens globally because the level of craft invested in each one is not reproducible by automated production. The tailor whose suits carry a waiting list measured in years because the quality of the work is unmatched. The software engineer whose code is so clean, so well considered, and so thoroughly tested that it becomes the reference point for how the work should be done. The financial connection is direct and significant. Shokunin-level mastery commands shokunin-level compensation. The premium that genuine excellence commands in any market, whether the market is for ramen, for suits, for software, for financial advice, for medical care, or for any other service or product where quality is distinguishable, is one of the most reliable and most defensible income premiums available. And the shokunin orientation toward work, the specific commitment to continuous refinement and genuine mastery, is the practice that produces that premium. The mastery premium, what genuine excellence actually pays. Here's the specific financial case for the shokunin approach to professional development, the documented relationship between genuine mastery and income that makes the investment of the shokunin orientation financially rational rather than merely admirable. In virtually every professional category, the distribution of compensation is not normal. It is heavily right-skewed, meaning that the top performers earn not slightly more than the average, but dramatically more. The top 10% of software engineers earn 3 to 5 times the median software engineering salary. The top 10% of financial advisors manage 10 times the assets of the median advisor. The top physicians in specialized fields earn 4 to 8 times the compensation of the median physician in the same specialty. The top real estate agents close 20 times the transaction volume of the median agent. This skew is not primarily a product of luck or of career strategy. It is primarily a product of genuine capability differential, the specific compounding advantage that mastery produces over sustained periods of deliberate development. The software engineer who writes dramatically better code than their peers doesn't just solve problems faster. They solve problems that their peers can't solve, which creates a market value that has no ceiling in the way that commodity skill performance does. The financial implication is the one that the shokunin philosophy has always implied: the investment in genuine mastery, the additional practice, the deliberate refinement, the relentless pursuit of improvement that the shokunin orientation requires, pays financial returns that are among the highest available in any professional domain. The question is not whether mastery is financially worth pursuing. The question is whether the specific individual is willing to make the investment. The shokunin work ethic, what it actually looks like. Here's the specific behavioral orientation of the shokunin that distinguishes it from the ordinary professional's approach to work, the practices that produce the mastery premium rather than the competent but replaceable professional's compensation. The shokunin approaches their work as a practice rather than a job. The distinction is significant. A job is performed to meet external standards and to receive the compensation that meeting those standards produces. A practice is engaged with to meet internal standards that exceed the external ones and that are refined continuously rather than fixed. The shokunin is not satisfied with meeting the client's expectations. They are dissatisfied whenever their work falls below their own standards, which are consistently higher than anyone else's. This internal standard orientation produces a specific and financially valuable consequence. The shokunin's quality is self-regulating rather than externally regulated. They don't need management, quality control processes, or incentive systems to produce excellent work because the internal standard is more demanding than any external system. This self-regulation makes shokunin-level practitioners highly valued by the organizations that employ them and highly successful as independent practitioners because the quality that is internally driven is more consistent and more reliable than quality that requires external monitoring to maintain. The shokunin also approaches every repetition of their work as an opportunity for refinement, rather than as a routine execution of an established process. The 10,000th bowl of ramen is not approached with the same process as the first. It is approached with the accumulated learning of 10,000 previous bowls and the specific question of what improvement is possible in this bowl. This orientation toward continuous refinement is the behavioral expression of the kaizen philosophy within the shokunin identity, the daily practice of incremental improvement applied to the craft that defines the professional identity. Building shokunin in your specific domain. Here's the practical development path for the shokunin orientation in the professional domain of someone watching this video. The specific practices that develop the mastery orientation regardless of the specific field. The first practice is deliberate practice, the specific form of skill development that research by Anders Ericsson and others has identified as the primary driver of expert-level performance. Deliberate practice is not the repetition of tasks at a comfortable level of performance, but the systematic engagement with the aspects of the skill that are currently at or beyond the limit of current capability. The musician who practices the difficult passages rather than playing through comfortable ones. The programmer who works on the problems that require learning rather than the problems that existing knowledge solves. The financial analyst who engages with the most complex analytical challenges rather than the straightforward ones. The financial return on deliberate practice is the mastery premium described earlier in this chapter, the income differential between genuine mastery and competent performance that the shokunin orientation, sustained over years, produces. The investment of deliberate practice is measured in hours. The return is measured in income differentials that compound over decades. The second practice is the pursuit of feedback that improves rather than feedback that validates. The shokunin seeks criticism rather than praise because criticism contains the information that enables improvement and praise does not. The professional who surrounds themselves with people who validate their current performance has optimized for comfort rather than for mastery. The professional who seeks the most demanding feedback available from the most expert practitioners in their field, from the most demanding clients, from the most rigorous assessment processes, has optimized for the continuous improvement that mastery requires. The third practice is the study of masters, the deliberate, sustained study of the best practitioners in the field for the purpose of understanding what excellence actually looks like and developing the internal standard that shokunin mastery requires. The shokunin cannot develop a standard for excellence without deeply understanding what excellence looks like. This understanding comes from direct exposure to the highest quality work available, reading the best practitioners' writing, working with or under the most skilled people available, studying the work of the acknowledged masters in the field with the specific question of what makes their work excellent. The reputation compound effect. Here's the specific financial mechanism through which the shokunin orientation produces wealth over time that distinguishes it from simply being very good at a job. The reputation compound effect. The reputation of a shokunin-level practitioner compounds in the same mathematical way that investment returns compound. Each period's reputation is built on the previous period's foundation, and the quality that generates each period's reputation reinforces the quality of the next period through the demands it attracts, the opportunities it generates, and the practitioners it connects the shokunin with. A practitioner who produces excellent work consistently develops a reputation that attracts clients, opportunities, and collaborators that are calibrated to that level of excellence, which produces more excellent work, which further develops the reputation, which attracts higher quality opportunities, which produces higher compensation, which enables greater investment in the craft, which produces further excellence. This virtuous cycle, once established, is financially self-perpetuating in a way that the competent but unremarkable practitioner's career never becomes. The shokunin is not competing on price because no one else can produce what they produce. The premium they command is not subject to market compression because the market cannot replicate the mastery that justifies it. This pricing power, the specific ability to command premium compensation without competitive pressure, is the shokunin's most durable financial advantage and the one that makes the mastery investment the highest returning professional development investment available. Chapter 7. Ma, the Japanese art of empty space and why having less produces more wealth. Here's the 7th Japanese habit, and it's the one that will feel most philosophical when introduced and most practically significant by the time the chapter is finished, because it addresses a specific dimension of financial life that almost no Western personal finance framework touches: the deliberate, intentional creation of empty space in your financial life, your physical environment, and your schedule, and the specific wealth-building outcomes that empty space produces. Mae, pronounced ma, a Japanese aesthetic and philosophical concept that translates approximately to negative space, pause, gap, or emptiness. The deliberate absence of something in a composition, a space, or a time period that makes what is present more valuable, more visible, and more effective than it would be if the empty space were filled. Ma is the pause between musical notes that makes the notes themselves meaningful. Ma is the empty space in a room that makes the objects present more visible and more appreciated. Ma is the silence in a conversation that allows what was said to be genuinely heard. And Ma, applied to financial life, is the deliberate maintenance of financial empty space, the capacity, the optionality, the breathing room that makes every financial element of the life more effective and more valuable than it would be if every financial dimension were filled to maximum capacity. The fully leveraged financial life and why it fails. Here's the specific financial failure mode that the absence of Ma produces: the fully leveraged financial life, in which every available resource has been committed, every financial capacity has been filled, and the absence of any buffer or empty space creates a system so tightly coupled that any disruption produces cascading failure. The fully leveraged financial life is the one that looks financially active from the outside: the maximum mortgage on the maximum house, the financed cars, the investment accounts leveraged to the extent the broker permits, the income committed to the maximum possible obligations, the schedule filled with the maximum number of income-generating activities. This life has optimized for maximum utilization of every financial resource and has, in doing so, eliminated the MA, the empty space, that would allow any single element to absorb disruption without transmitting it to everything else. When a disruption arrives, and disruption in a financial life over any significant period is not a possibility but a certainty, the fully leveraged system has no capacity to absorb it. The job loss that would be manageable in a financial life with 6 months of cash reserves is catastrophic in a financial life where every dollar of income is committed to obligations before it arrives. The market decline that would be weathered by the investor with cash reserves to deploy at lower prices is devastating to the investor who is leveraged to the maximum and receives margin calls at the worst possible moment. The business opportunity that would be seized by the entrepreneur with financial ma, with capital, with time, with optionality, is missed by the entrepreneur whose resources are fully committed to existing operations. The Ma principle in financial life is the deliberate maintenance of empty space, reserves, optionality, uncommitted resources that prevents the tightly coupled system failures that full leverage produces and that simultaneously creates the specific conditions that financial opportunities require. The 3 forms of financial Mai. Here's the specific application of the Ma concept to personal financial management, the 3 forms of financial empty space that produce the most significant wealth-building outcomes when deliberately maintained. The first form is cash ma, the liquid financial reserves that are maintained not for any specific purpose, but as general-purpose optionality. This goes beyond the emergency fund, which has a specific purpose. Cash ma is the financial breathing room, the amount of liquid capital that is not committed to any specific use, that allows the financial life to absorb unexpected events without disruption and to seize unexpected opportunities without needing to create the resources from scratch. The specific wealth-building value of cash Ma is both defensive and offensive. Defensively, it absorbs the disruptions that the fully leveraged life cannot. the unexpected expense, the income interruption, the obligation that arrives without planning. Offensively, it creates the ability to act on opportunities that require immediate capital deployment, the investment opportunity at an attractive price, the business acquisition that requires a quick decision, the career investment that produces long-term income growth but requires short-term cash. The Japanese concept of maintaining reserves specifically for opportunity, not for emergency but for the possibility of advantageous action, is the offensive dimension of cash ma that the Western emergency fund concept doesn't capture. The emergency fund is reactive ma, the opportunity reserve is proactive ma. Both serve the financial life, and both require the deliberate maintenance of empty space that the fully leveraged life eliminates. The second form is time ma, the deliberate maintenance of unscheduled, uncommitted time in the professional and personal calendar. Time ma is the specific resource that allows the highest quality thinking, the strategic reflection, the creative problem solving, the opportunity evaluation, that a schedule filled to maximum capacity with the execution of existing commitments cannot produce. The financial value of time, ma, is the value of the thinking that only unscheduled time enables, the business strategy that emerges from a weekend of genuine reflection, the investment thesis that develops from an afternoon of undirected reading, the career pivot that crystallizes during a period of reduced professional intensity, the relationship investment that becomes possible when the schedule has room for genuine presence rather than hurried transactions. None of these high-value outputs can be scheduled into a full calendar. They require the empty space that a full calendar eliminates. The third form is decision ma, the deliberate maintenance of space between financial decisions, particularly large ones, that prevents the emotional momentum of one decision from carrying automatically into the next, and that allows each significant financial commitment to be made with the full clarity of a fresh evaluation rather than the partial clarity of momentum. The specific financial behavior that decision ma prevents is the cascade of commitments, the house purchase that leads immediately to furniture purchasing, that leads immediately to home improvement, that leads immediately to the lifestyle upgrade in every other category, that converts a single large financial decision into a sequence of commitments whose aggregate cost was never consciously evaluated. Maintaining the pause, the empty space, between significant financial decisions is the practice that gives each decision its own evaluation, rather than allowing the momentum of commitment to carry through without reflection. The empty room principle. Here's the physical manifestation of ma that produces the most direct and most visible financial consequences: the Japanese aesthetic preference for empty space in the physical environment, the room that is not filled to capacity, the closet that has room to breathe, the home that contains what is needed and valued rather than everything that could fit, and the specific financial behaviors this aesthetic produces. The physical environment filled to capacity with objects requires the continuous financial maintenance of that full capacity, the storage solutions that accommodate the overflow, the cleaning time that managing many objects requires, the replacement spending that a high object count home generates as items wear, break, or fall out of favor. The physical environment maintained with deliberate empty space, the ma of the room, requires none of this maintenance overhead and produces the specific financial efficiency of a lower volume, higher quality relationship with physical possessions. The empty space in the physical environment also produces the psychological effect of ma, the clarity and calm that negative space generates, which has specific financial consequences through better decision-making, reduced anxiety-driven spending, and the specific contentment that a simplified physical environment produces. The cluttered environment is associated with elevated cortisol levels, reduced decision-making quality, and increased anxiety-driven consumption. The MA environment produces the opposite effect: the practical implementation of physical ma, the deliberate creation of empty space in the most used areas of the home, not the radical minimalism of a nearly empty apartment, but the specific practice of removing what isn't genuinely used and valued, and maintaining the empty space rather than filling it with new acquisitions. One drawer cleared, one shelf simplified, one closet reduced to what is actually worn. The financial consequence of each individual clearing is modest. The cumulative financial consequence of a home maintained at genuine sufficiency rather than maximum capacity is significant. The calendar ma and the wealth connection. Here's the specific financial connection between calendar ma, unscheduled time, and wealth outcomes that makes the time dimension of ma as financially significant as the cash dimension. The most financially valuable activities available to most professionals and entrepreneurs are not the activities that fill a schedule most efficiently. They are the activities that require the kind of thinking that scheduled time doesn't enable: the strategic reflection, the creative exploration, the relationship investment, the learning, and that a fully scheduled life systematically prevents. The entrepreneur whose calendar is filled with meetings and execution tasks is preventing themselves from doing the thinking that would improve the strategy that all those execution tasks are implementing. The investor whose time is consumed by the management of existing positions has eliminated the time for the research that would identify the next opportunity. The professional whose schedule has no unstructured time has eliminated the space for the skill development that would produce the income growth the current schedule is generating too little of. Calendar Ma is not laziness. It is the specific resource allocation that prioritizes the activities that require empty space, which are often the highest value activities available, over the activities that fill the schedule most efficiently but produce the lowest marginal return on the next hour invested. The specific practice: protect a minimum of 1/2 day per week from scheduling. No meetings, no commitments, no obligations. Use it for whatever genuine reflection, learning, or exploration presents itself. The financial return on this practice is not trackable to specific outputs, but is visible in the aggregate quality of the decisions made by a mind that has been given regular space to think rather than perpetual obligation to execute. Chapter 8. Gammon and Ninjo: the balance of patience and human connection that sustains everything. Here's the 8th habit. And this one comes as a pair because the two concepts it describes are most powerful in combination, and presenting them separately would miss the specific dynamic between them that makes them such a potent foundation for long-term wealth building. Gammon and Ninjo: two Japanese values that seem, at first description, to point in opposite directions, one toward stoic endurance, the other toward warm human connection, but that in practice support each other in ways that produce both the behavioral discipline and the psychological sustainability that long-term wealth accumulation requires. Gammon: the productive patience that delayed gratification requires. Gammon, pronounced ga-man, translated as endurance, patience, perseverance, or bearing the seemingly unbearable with dignity, a concept deeply embedded in Japanese culture that describes the specific capacity to sustain effort and discipline through difficulty without complaint, without abandonment, and without the reduction in quality that impatience typically produces. Gammon is not passive suffering. It is the active, dignified maintenance of standards and commitments through the difficulty that maintaining them involves. The specific form of patience that is not waiting for things to improve, but continuing to do the right things regardless of whether immediate conditions are favorable. The financial application of gammon is the specific capacity that long-term wealth accumulation requires, and that most people who fail at it lack. The ability to maintain the savings rate, the investment discipline, the financial standards during the periods when doing so produces no visible reward, and when the temptation to reduce the standard in exchange for present comfort is at its strongest. The middle years of wealth accumulation, the years 3 through 7 approximately, when the investment account is growing but not yet at the scale where compound growth is visually dramatic, when the savings rate is being maintained, but the financial independence goal is still distant, when the behavioral disciplines have been established but haven't yet produced the outcomes that validate them, require gammon, not the dramatic crisis requiring endurance of wartime or physical hardship, but the quieter, sustained, dignified patience of continuing to do right financial things when the doing feels routine rather than meaningful. The Japanese cultural reverence for gammon produces a specific financial orientation that the immediate gratification culture of most Western consumer economies doesn't. The genuine respect for the person who maintains standards under difficulty, the cultural support for delayed gratification as a virtue rather than a deprivation, the social context that makes patience admirable rather than socially disadvantaged. The practical development of gammon in a financial context is not about becoming stoic or suppressing the difficulty that sustained financial discipline involves. It is about developing the specific relationship with difficulty that recognizes it as a normal feature of any worthwhile endeavor, rather than as evidence that the endeavor is wrong. The savings rate that is difficult to maintain is not wrong, because it is difficult. The investment strategy that is difficult to sustain through market volatility is not wrong because it produces anxiety. The income development path that requires sustained effort without immediate recognition is not wrong because it is slow. Gamen is the specific capacity to hold the commitment through the difficulty, and the wealth outcomes of that capacity, sustained over the years that long-term accumulation requires, are the compound interest of behavioral discipline. Ninjo, the human connection that makes everything sustainable. Ninjo, pronounced ninjo, translated as human feelings, human nature, or compassion, the Japanese concept of the genuine human emotional connection that exists between people and that creates the warmth, the belonging, and the mutual support that makes sustained effort sustainable rather than isolating. Ninjo is the counterbalance to Gamen in the Japanese cultural value system. Where Gamen emphasizes endurance and discipline, Ninjo emphasizes the human connections that provide the meaning that makes endurance worthwhile and the support that makes discipline sustainable. The two values coexist in the Japanese cultural framework precisely because each is incomplete without the other. Gamen without Ninjo becomes cold, isolated endurance that eventually breaks. Ninjo without Gamen becomes warm sociability that never develops the discipline required for significant achievement. The financial application of Ninjo is the specific role that genuine human relationships play in the wealth-building journey, as sources of information, as accountability structures, as emotional support through the difficult periods, and as the ultimate context within which financial goals have meaning. The wealth builder who has developed the financial discipline of Gamen without the human connections of Ninjo has built a financial trajectory without a purpose that those connections define. The financial goal that is entirely self-referential, accumulate wealth because wealth is the goal, is less sustainable than the financial goal that is grounded in the specific relationships and contributions that wealth enables. The Ninjo dimension of the Japanese wealth-building psychology is the answer to the why that Gamen sustains through the how. The practical integration, building both simultaneously. Here's the specific practice that integrates Gamen and Ninjo in the financial life. The way of pursuing financial goals that maintains the discipline of Gamen without sacrificing the human connections that Ninjo values. The integration looks like this. The financial disciplines are maintained as non-negotiable commitments. The savings rate, the investment contributions, the spending standards, while the social spending and relationship investment that Ninjo requires are built into the financial plan as genuine priorities rather than afterthoughts or luxuries. The financial plan that funds experiences with the people who matter, that allocates resources for the relationship investments that create genuine connection, that preserves time for the human interactions that provide meaning alongside the financial activities that build wealth. This plan is sustainable in a way that the pure Gamen plan of maximum savings at the expense of all relational investment is not. The human connections that Ninjo values provide the meaning that makes the Gamen-required patience feel worthwhile rather than arbitrary. The specific budget category that the Gamen-Ninjo integration produces, a deliberately funded relationship investment line in the household budget, not an entertainment budget or a dining budget, a relationship investment budget explicitly named and explicitly funded that covers the experiences, the gifts, the time investments that maintain and deepen the relationships that give the financial goals their meaning. This line is protected with the same discipline as the savings rate because the relationships it funds are as essential to the long-term sustainability of the wealth-building journey as the savings themselves. Chapter 9. The Tanuki Savings Strategy, Japan's hidden secret for building wealth in layers. Here's the 9th habit, one that doesn't have a single famous Japanese term but that emerges from the specific Japanese approach to savings that is most distinct from Western savings frameworks, the layered savings system that treats different savings as different resources with different purposes, different timelines, and different levels of accessibility, rather than treating all savings as a single undifferentiated pool. The tanuki, the Japanese raccoon dog of folklore, is known for its ability to carry many things simultaneously, and the saving strategy this chapter describes borrows that image. The Japanese household that carries multiple savings pools simultaneously, each with a specific purpose, a specific timeline, and a specific psychological relationship that makes the system as a whole more effective than any single savings pool could be. The problem with single pool savings. Here's the specific failure mode of the single pool savings approach. The one account, one balance, one savings number. That the Japanese layered approach addresses. The single savings pool is psychologically fragile because every dollar in it is simultaneously the emergency fund, the opportunity fund, the short-term goal fund, and the long-term wealth accumulation fund. When an expense arises that seems legitimate, the vacation, the home improvement, the appliance replacement, it is psychologically difficult to resist drawing from the single pool because there is no specific mental designation that protects any portion of it from the legitimate seeming expense. The result is the savings account that fluctuates rather than grows, the balance that rises when income exceeds spending and falls when a specific expense appears convincingly legitimate, and that never reaches the scale required for genuine wealth accumulation because there is always something that legitimately justifies drawing it down. The Japanese layered system. Here's the specific structure of the Japanese household savings system that addresses this fragility, the layered approach that gives each savings pool a specific designation, a specific timeline, and a specific psychological relationship that protects it from the lateral movement of funds that single pool savings invites. Layer 1 is the Kurashi Fund, the Daily Life Reserve. This is the closest equivalent to the Western Emergency Fund, 3 to 6 months of essential living expenses in a liquid, accessible account. The Kurashi Fund is designated specifically for disruptions to the daily life, job loss, medical expense, essential repair, and its specific designation protects it psychologically from the vacation or the home improvement that would be drawn from a non-designated single pool. Layer 2 is the Yume Fund, the Dream Fund. This is the medium-term savings pool designated for specific goals that have a defined timeline: the home purchase, the business launch, the education investment, the planned major experience. The Yumi Fund has a specific target, a specific timeline, and a specific emotional relationship. It represents the specific dreams being worked toward that makes contributing to it feel like progress towards something meaningful rather than simply declining to spend. Layer 3 is the Mirai Fund, the Future Fund. This is the long-term investment pool that is designated for financial independence, the investment accounts, the retirement contributions, the equity building that produces the long-term wealth accumulation that the other layers protect the short and medium term for. The Mirai Fund is not touched for any purpose other than long-term wealth accumulation, not for emergencies, which the Kurashi Fund handles, not for goals, which the Yume Fund handles, and its specific designation creates the psychological protection that allows it to compound without interruption. The psychological power of named accounts. Here's the specific psychological mechanism that makes the layered named account system more effective than the single pool system. The reason that the naming and designation of savings pools produces different behavior than the same money in a single undifferentiated account. Research in behavioral economics, particularly the work of Richard Thaler on mental accounting, consistently demonstrates that people treat money differently depending on how it is mentally categorized rather than treating all money as perfectly fungible regardless of its designation. Money designated for education is more likely to be spent on education. Money designated for emergency is more likely to be preserved for emergency. Money designated for long-term investment is more likely to be kept in long-term investment rather than rated for short-term convenience. The Japanese layered savings system is an institutionalized application of this psychological reality, a system built around the specific knowledge that naming money changes how it is treated and that the right names applied to the right purposes produce the financial behaviors that single pool savings does not. The practical implementation: open separate savings accounts for each layer. Most high-yield savings providers allow multiple accounts to be named individually. Name them specifically: emergency fund, home purchase, investment account. Automate separate contributions to each account. The separation makes the purpose of each dollar visible and the protection of each pool psychologically robust in a way that a single account's balance never is. The bonus and windfall protocol. Here's the specific Japanese savings practice regarding income that arrives outside the regular monthly flow: the bonus, the tax refund, the inheritance, the unexpected financial gain, that produces dramatically different long-term financial outcomes than the Western default of spending windfalls as celebrations of their arrival. The Japanese household savings convention for bonuses and windfalls, rooted in the cultural orientation toward patient, systematic wealth building, is to direct a predetermined percentage of every windfall to the mirai long-term investment pool before any other allocation. Not after considering what might be nice to spend it on, before. The allocation to the future is automatic and predetermined, protecting the windfall from the consumption reflex that its unexpected arrival tends to activate. The specific allocation varies by household and by the state of the other savings layers. If the Kurashi fund is below target, the windfall might go there first. If the Yume fund has a specific near-term goal, a portion might go there. But the non-negotiable principle is that the Mirai fund receives its predetermined share of every windfall before any consumption occurs. The future claims its portion first. The financial consequence of this protocol applied consistently over a career of bonuses, tax refunds, and occasional unexpected income is a long-term investment fund that has been built not only from the regular monthly contribution but from every income event that crossed the household threshold, a fund significantly larger than the regular contribution-only version would produce. Chapter 10. Bringing it all together. The Japanese wealth-building system as a unified practice. Here's the chapter that steps back from the individual habits and reveals something that becomes visible only when all 9 habits are viewed simultaneously. They are not independent practices that happen to share a cultural origin. They are a coherent, mutually reinforcing system in which each habit strengthens every other habit, and in which the whole is genuinely more powerful than the sum of its parts. How the habits connect. Here's the specific way that each habit in this video connects to and reinforces the others. The web of connections that makes the Japanese wealth-building system a system rather than a list. Kakeibo, the handwritten financial tracking, produces the specific awareness of financial reality that makes all the other habits more effective. You cannot practice mottainai effectively without the awareness of what you're spending on replacements. You cannot practice harahachi-bu effectively without the awareness of where consumption is exceeding genuine sufficiency. You cannot track the progress of the layered saving system without the monthly review that kakeibo provides. The financial awareness that kakeibo generates is the information infrastructure on which every other habit operates. Ikigai, the purposeful work orientation, provides the motivation architecture that makes all the other habits sustainable. The shokunin mastery practice is most naturally developed in a domain aligned with genuine ikigai. The gamen patience that long-term wealth accumulation requires is most sustainable when the goal it is maintaining the discipline toward is genuinely meaningful. The ma of preserved time is most productively used when there is genuine purpose that the freed time serves. Ikigai is the why that gives the behavioral discipline of every other habit its staying power. Mottainai, the waste avoidance philosophy, reinforces the harahachi-bu consumption sufficiency orientation, the kakeibo expense awareness, and the ma principle of maintaining empty space by reducing the volume of consumption that fills it. The household that genuinely embodies mottainai consumes less, replaces less, and accumulates less, creating the financial and physical space that ma requires and the savings that the layered system can capture. Kaizen, the continuous improvement orientation, provides the methodological framework for developing all the other habits. Each habit is not implemented to perfection immediately. It is implemented imperfectly and improved continuously in the Kaizen manner until it operates with the automaticity of an established system rather than the effortfulness of a new practice. The Kaizen approach to habit development is more reliable than the all-or-nothing implementation that most habit-building advice promotes. Harahachi-bu, the consumption sufficiency principle, is the philosophical foundation of the financial space that the Tanuki layered savings system requires to fill. You cannot consistently fund 3 savings layers while consuming at maximum capacity. The 80% sufficiency principle creates the gap between income and spending that the layered savings system captures and directs toward the future. Shokunin, the mastery orientation, generates the income premium that makes the other habits compound most powerfully. The financial habits that produce 20% wealth accumulation on a $50,000 income produce very different outcomes than the same habits applied to a $150,000 income that Shokunin Mastery makes achievable. The income growth that Mastery generates is the fuel that the savings and investment habits of the other chapters convert into long-term wealth. Ma, the empty space principle, creates the financial, temporal, and psychological conditions in which all the other habits can function most effectively. The financial breathing room of cash ma prevents the crisis-driven behavior that fully leveraged financial lives produce. The time ma of the unscheduled calendar enables the kakeibo reflection, the ikigai exploration, the kaizen review, and the ninjo relationship investment that a fully committed schedule prevents. The physical ma of the simplified environment creates the clarity that all the other habits require. Gamen and ninjo, the paired values of patient endurance and human connection, provide the behavioral and emotional infrastructure that sustains all the other habits through the years they require to produce their full compound effects. Gamen sustains the discipline. Ninjo provides the meaning that makes the discipline feel purposeful rather than arbitrary. The combination is the psychological foundation on which every other habit in the system rests, the compound effect of the system. Here's the specific financial outcome that the Japanese wealth-building system produces when practiced consistently, not as a theoretical projection, but as the documented pattern of the households and individuals who embody it. The household that practices kakeibo achieves a 15% to 35% savings rate from full awareness of financial reality. The mottainai orientation reduces annual consumption spending by $5,000 to $15,000 through waste avoidance, quality over quantity purchasing, and repair before replacement decisions. The harahachi-bu consumption sufficiency practice redirects the gap between income and genuine satisfaction spending, typically 15% to 25% of income, to the layered savings system. The Shokunin Mastery orientation generates an income 30% to 200% above what commodity-level performance in the same field would produce, depending on the domain and the depth of mastery achieved. The combined effect of these practices on a household's financial trajectory is not additive. Each practice individually produces some improvement. It is multiplicative. The practices reinforce each other in ways that produce aggregate outcomes larger than the sum of their individual contributions. The shokunin income, combined with the harahachi-bu spending sufficiency and the mottainai waste avoidance and the kakeibo awareness, produces a savings rate that is structurally higher than either income or frugality alone could generate. The ma of financial breathing room, funded by the harahachi-bu sufficiency gap, enables the opportunity seizing that the fully leveraged financial life cannot access. The ikigai-aligned career, sustained by gamen patience and ninjo relational depth, generates not just higher income, but income from work that produces genuine satisfaction, eliminating the compensatory spending that dissatisfied work generates. The implementation sequence. Here's the specific sequence for implementing the Japanese wealth-building system that is most likely to produce lasting change rather than enthusiastic short-term adoption followed by gradual abandonment. The order that respects the kaizen principle of incremental implementation. Start with kakeibo. 1 month of handwritten financial tracking produces the awareness that makes every other practice more effective. The awareness is the foundation. Nothing else works as well without it. Add mottainai in the 2nd month. The awareness that kakeibo produced has identified the spending categories where waste is highest. Apply the mottainai lens to those categories specifically. Repair one thing that would previously have been replaced. Use one thing fully before discarding it. Buy one quality item instead of 2 cheap ones. Develop the harahachi-bu consumption sufficiency assessment in the 3rd month using the kakeibo data from 2 months of tracking. Identify the spending categories where consumption exceeds genuine satisfaction. Begin the 80% consumption practice in the category where the gap is largest. Explore ikigai in parallel, not as a month-long project, but as an ongoing inquiry that runs alongside the practical financial practices. The exploration doesn't produce a sudden revelation. It produces gradual clarity over months and years. Add the kaizen practice of 1 financial improvement per month. Each month, identify and implement 1 specific improvement to the financial life. 1 expense reduced, 1 income avenue explored, 1 investment optimized, 1 skill developed. The kaizen accumulation of 12 improvements per year produces compound financial improvement that feels manageable in individual steps and significant in annual aggregate. Implement the tanuki layered saving system after the harahachibu practice has created the spending gap that the layers can fill. Open the named accounts. Set the automatic transfers. The system requires the gap to function, and the gap requires the sufficiency practice to create. Develop shokunin mastery as a long-term practice that operates on a years-long timeline. Identify the domain. Begin the deliberate practice. Seek the demanding feedback. Study the masters. The financial return begins immediately in the form of the engagement and motivation that mastery development produces, and compounds into the income premium that years of development generate. Maintain Ma as the discipline that protects all the other practices from the fully leveraged trap. Protect the cash buffer. Protect the unscheduled time. Protect the physical empty space. The practices require room to operate, and Ma creates that room. Sustain gammon as the attitude that carries the system through the difficult periods, the market downturns, the income disruptions, the months when the financial goal feels distant and the consumption alternatives feel appealing. And nourish Ninjo as the relational foundation that makes the gammon-required patience feel purposeful rather than merely endured. Chapter 11. Wabi-sabi and Wealth. How Embracing Imperfection Accelerates Financial Progress. Here's the chapter that addresses the specific psychological obstacle that stops more wealth-building journeys in their tracks than any financial variable. The obstacle that has nothing to do with income, savings rate, investment returns, or any of the numerical dimensions of personal finance, and everything to do with the specific relationship between perfectionism and financial progress that most financial content never addresses. Wabi-sabi, pronounced wabi-sabi. The Japanese aesthetic philosophy of finding beauty in imperfection, incompleteness, and impermanence, the worldview that values the cracked ceramic bowl precisely because of its crack, that sees the weathered wood as more beautiful than the pristine surface, that finds the moss-covered stone more compelling than the polished one. A philosophy that is, at its deepest level, about accepting the world as it actually is rather than as a perfected ideal would have it be, and finding genuine value and genuine beauty in the imperfect, incomplete reality rather than perpetually deferring appreciation until the ideal is achieved. The connection to wealth building is specific, direct, and more financially significant than the aesthetic framing initially suggests, because the most common and most expensive financial behavior that the absence of wabi-sabi produces is this: waiting for perfect conditions before beginning, maintaining, or adjusting the financial behaviors that produce wealth accumulation, the perfectionism tax. What waiting for perfect conditions costs. Here's the specific financial cost of the perfectionism that wabi-sabi addresses: the documented, calculable cost of waiting for conditions to be right before taking the financial actions that compound over time. The investor who waits for the market to be at the right level before investing. The person who waits until they understand investing perfectly before opening the investment account. The entrepreneur who waits until the business plan is perfect before launching. The saver who waits until the budget is fully organized before beginning to save. The person who abandoned the financial plan because 1 month's numbers were imperfect and concluded that they couldn't maintain the system. Each of these waiting behaviors has a specific financial cost that compounds over the period of the wait. The investor who waited 12 months for better market conditions before investing $20,000 missed approximately $1,400 in expected returns at historical average rates, plus the compound growth on that $1,400 for every subsequent year. The entrepreneur who spent 18 months perfecting the business plan before launching spent 18 months not generating the revenue that the imperfect but launched version would have produced. The saver who waited until the budget was perfect before saving spent 12 months consuming what they would have saved. The aggregate cost of perfectionism-driven financial delay, measured over a full wealth-building career, is one of the largest and least recognized sources of underperformance, not because any single delay was catastrophic, but because the repeated pattern of waiting for conditions that are never quite perfect produces a lifetime of missed compounding that no subsequent catching up can fully recover. The imperfect start and why it beats the perfect plan. Here's the specific wabi-sabi insight that is most directly actionable for anyone whose financial progress has been delayed by perfectionism. The imperfect start produces better financial outcomes than the perfect plan that never begins. The investment account opened today with $500 and a vague understanding of index funds will produce better outcomes over 30 years than the investment account that is opened in 2 years after thorough research produces the perfect allocation. Because 2 years of compound growth on the $500 and the regular contributions that follow is worth more than the marginal improvement in allocation that the additional 2 years of research might produce. The budget that captures 70% of spending accurately and is maintained consistently produces better financial outcomes than the comprehensive budget that captures 100% of spending but is abandoned after 3 months because the maintenance effort is unsustainable. The imperfect system maintained is always more financially effective than the perfect system abandoned. The business launched with an imperfect product that is improved through customer feedback produces better outcomes than the business that waits for the perfect product before launching, both because the revenue starts earlier and because the customer feedback that drives the improvement is only available through launch, not through planning. The wabi-sabi financial philosophy is not an excuse for low standards. It is the specific wisdom that the imperfect action in the right direction produces financial outcomes that the perfect plan deferred indefinitely cannot. Standards matter. The direction of action matters. The perfection of the start matters less than the reality of it. Accepting financial imperfection without abandoning financial progress. Here's the specific application of wabi-sabi to the inevitable imperfections that every financial journey produces. The month where the savings rate dropped, the investment decision that underperformed, the financial plan that required adjustment, the goal that had to be modified, and the specific psychological relationship with those imperfections that produces continued progress rather than the abandonment that perfectionism triggers. The perfectionist financial relationship treats every deviation from the plan as a failure, as evidence that the system doesn't work, or that the person is incapable of maintaining it. This treatment of imperfection as failure produces the specific pattern of abandonment. The financial plan that was working reasonably well is abandoned after one difficult month because the deviation from the plan feels like evidence of fundamental failure rather than a normal fluctuation in a generally working system. The wabi-sabi financial relationship treats every deviation as information, as a data point about what the plan needs to account for, what the system needs to accommodate, what adjustment might improve the approach. The difficult month is not failure, it is feedback. The investment that underperformed is not catastrophe. It is a learning input. The goal that required modification is not evidence that the goal was wrong. It is evidence that the information available at the time of the original goal setting was incomplete, which is always true of financial planning because the future is always incompletely known. The financial journey that accommodates imperfection, that continues through the difficult months, incorporates the learning from the underperforming investments, adjusts the goals when circumstances require, produces outcomes that the journey abandoned at the first significant imperfection never approaches. The beauty of the financial journey. Here's the deepest application of the wabi-sabi philosophy to wealth building, the one that is most genuinely Japanese in its orientation and most genuinely useful for anyone who is in the difficult middle of the financial accumulation process, where the goal is still far and the progress is still gradual. Wabi-sabi is the philosophy that finds beauty in the process rather than only in the destination, that sees the value in the incomplete, the impermanent, the work in progress. Applied to wealth building, it is the specific capacity to find genuine meaning and genuine satisfaction in the financial journey itself, rather than deferring all satisfaction to the moment of financial independence arrival. The person whose financial journey is organized around the arrival, who is enduring the accumulation period in order to reach the destination where real life can begin, is vulnerable to every form of impatience, every shortcut, every premature abandonment that the long wait produces. The person whose financial journey is oriented toward the wabi-sabi appreciation of the process, who finds genuine satisfaction in the monthly kakeibo review, in the watching of the investment account grow, in the development of shokunin mastery, in the deepening of the ninjo relationships that the journey is building alongside the financial position, is sustained by the journey rather than merely enduring it. This orientation produces better financial outcomes because it produces more consistent financial behavior. The person who is engaged with the financial journey rather than merely tolerating it makes better decisions, maintains the disciplines more consistently, and navigates the inevitable imperfections more gracefully than the person who is enduring rather than engaging. The crack in the ceramic bowl is not a flaw to be repaired before the bowl can be used. It is the specific history of the bowl, the evidence of its lived experience, the mark of its individuality, that the kintsugi gold makes beautiful. The imperfection of your current financial position is not a flaw to be corrected before real financial life can begin. It is the specific starting point of a journey whose every stage has value. And the wabi-sabi relationship with it is the orientation that allows that value to be genuinely appreciated rather than perpetually deferred. Chapter 12. The Final Japanese Habit, Omotenashi, and Why Generosity is the Most Underrated Wealth Strategy. Here's the final chapter. And it's the one that will be most surprising as the closing argument for a video about wealth-building habits, because the habit it describes is not about accumulation at all. It is about giving. Specifically, it is about the Japanese cultural practice of exceptional generosity and hospitality, and the specific ways that this generosity, practiced consistently, produces the financial outcomes that the accumulation-focused habits of the previous chapters are building toward. Omotenashi, pronounced omote-nashe, the Japanese concept of wholehearted hospitality, a word made up of two Japanese concepts that together mean to present one's heart without concealment. The anticipatory, genuine, non-transactional generosity that Japanese hospitality is famous for globally. The host who prepares for every guest's need before it is expressed, who gives without any expectation of reciprocity, who finds genuine satisfaction in the well-being and comfort of others. Omotenashi is why a Japanese hotel provides everything the guest might need before they think to ask. It is why the Japanese shopkeeper wraps every purchase with the care of a gift even when it is a routine transaction. It is why the Japanese professional invests in the success of their client beyond what the contract specifies and beyond what any immediate financial return would justify. It is the cultural orientation toward genuine, proactive, non-transactional service to others that has made Japanese hospitality, service quality, and professional relationships globally admired. And it is, when understood in the financial context this chapter will describe, one of the most financially powerful orientations available, not despite its non-transactional character, but because of it. The paradox of generous wealth building. Here's the paradox that the Omotenashi wealth building principle presents: the orientation toward giving, toward genuine, proactive, non-transactional service to others. IA produces financial outcomes that the orientation toward accumulation alone doesn't, through mechanisms that are both psychologically and practically specific. The psychological mechanism, the omotenashi orientation toward others, the genuine investment in other people's well-being, success, and satisfaction, produces the specific type of professional reputation and relationship quality that generates financial returns through referrals, through trust, through the premium that clients, customers, and employers pay for the practitioner who genuinely cares about outcomes rather than merely completing transactions. The practically specific mechanism, the person who consistently delivers more value than was contracted, who anticipates needs rather than waiting to be asked, who invests in the success of the people they serve beyond what is strictly required. This person builds the kind of professional reputation that the shokunin mastery orientation generates through capability. The combination of shokunin capability and omotenashi orientation, the rare practitioner who is both exceptionally skilled and genuinely invested in the client's success, commands compensation premiums and generates referral networks that the capable but transactional practitioner never develops. The omotenashi professional practice. Here's what the omotenashi orientation looks like in practice in professional contexts. The specific behaviors that distinguish the omotenashi practitioner from the transactional one and that produce the specific financial outcomes the philosophy generates. The omotenashi professional anticipates client needs rather than waiting to be asked. the consultant who delivers the analysis the client requested and also identifies the adjacent issue that the analysis revealed, without waiting for a new contract to cover it, the doctor who provides the medical care requested and also addresses the related concern the patient mentioned without intending to ask about, the financial advisor who manages the portfolio according to the mandate and also flags the estate planning gap they noticed while doing so. These unprompted, proactive contributions to the client's well-being, beyond what was contracted, are the behavioral expression of omotenashi in professional contexts. The financial consequence of this proactive generosity is not immediate or transactional. The additional value delivered is not invoiced separately, at least not in the first instance. Its return comes through the specific trust and loyalty it generates, the client who renews automatically because the relationship has produced value beyond the contracted scope, the referral that arrives because the client's description of their experience included specific examples of care that exceeded expectations, the premium compensation that results from a reputation built on consistent delivery of more than was asked. The omotenashi orientation also produces the specific quality of relationship that the transactional orientation cannot, the professional relationship that has genuine human warmth, genuine mutual investment, genuine care for outcomes rather than merely for deliverables. This relationship quality is both intrinsically valuable, it makes the professional experience genuinely better for everyone involved, and financially valuable through the specific loyalty, referral generation, and premium pricing that warm, genuine professional relationships support. The generosity compound effect. Here's the specific financial mechanism that makes generosity, practiced with the omotenashi orientation of genuine care rather than calculated reciprocity, a wealth-building strategy rather than a wealth-reducing one, the generosity compound effect. Genuine generosity, the kind that is given without expectation of specific reciprocity, generates a return that is both larger and more durable than the return on transactional value exchange, because it activates the reciprocity principle at the deepest level. The person who gives generously and genuinely without transactional calculation creates a specific type of social debt in the recipient, not the formal obligation of a contract, but the human motivation to return genuine care that has been genuinely given. This motivation, distributed across the many people who have received genuine generosity from the omotenashi practitioner, produces a network of goodwill that generates financial returns in forms that transactional relationships don't. The referral that was given enthusiastically because the person giving it genuinely wanted their contact to experience the same quality of care they had received. The opportunity that was shared because the generous practitioner's genuine investment in others had made them genuinely invested in the practitioner's success. The premium that was paid without negotiation because the relationship had established a trust that made price comparison feel beside the point. The compound effect of this network of goodwill, developed over years of consistent omotenashi practice, is a professional and financial ecosystem that the transactional practitioner's contracted relationships simply don't generate, and that produces financial returns whose source is difficult to trace to any specific generous act precisely because the return is the aggregate product of the entire orientation rather than any single transaction. The community wealth connection. Here's the broader wealth dimension of the omotenashi principle that extends beyond the individual financial return and that connects to the most fundamental Japanese understanding of wealth, the understanding that individual wealth and community wealth are not separate categories but are deeply interdependent. The Japanese concept of wealth has historically been more community embedded than the Western individualistic wealth framework, more focused on the well-being of the household and the community, and less focused on the accumulation of individual assets as a measure of personal worth. The omotenashi orientation is the expression of this community-embedded wealth understanding. Genuine care for the well-being of others is not charity that competes with wealth accumulation, but an integral component of the social fabric that makes wealth accumulation possible and meaningful. The practical financial expression of this community-embedded wealth understanding is the investment in local community and professional community that generates the specific social capital whose financial returns are diffuse, long-term, and disproportionately large relative to the investments that produce them. The professional who invests in the success of junior colleagues, who mentors genuinely, shares knowledge openly, creates opportunities for others, builds a network of people who are both more capable because of that investment and genuinely motivated to contribute to the mentor's success in return. The business owner who invests in the community where they operate, in the local organizations, the local talent, the local relationships, builds a community of people who are genuinely invested in the business's success because the business has been genuinely invested in theirs. These investments have financial returns that are real, compound over time, and produce the specific type of durable financial position embedded in genuine community, supported by genuine relationships, generating genuine value, that purely individualistic wealth accumulation strategies don't build. The complete Japanese wealth system. Here's the final synthesis that Omotenashi adds to the complete Japanese wealth building picture. The way that generosity and genuine care for others completes the system that the previous 11 chapters described. Kakeibo provides the awareness. Ikigai provides the purpose. Mottainai provides the respect for value. Kaizen provides the improvement orientation. Hara Hachibu provides the sufficiency practice. Shokunin provides the mastery. Ma provides the space. Gamen and Ninjo provide the patience and connection. The Tanuki layered system provides the financial structure. Wabi-sabi provides the acceptance of imperfection. And Omotenashi provides the outward orientation, the genuine care for others that completes the internal wealth-building system by connecting it to the human community that gives it meaning, and that, through the generosity compound effect, amplifies its financial returns. The complete Japanese wealth-building system is not a set of financial techniques applied to an otherwise unchanged life. It is a coherent philosophy of living, of relating to money, to work, to objects, to time, to other people, and to the community, that produces wealth as a natural consequence of being fully, genuinely, and intentionally engaged. With every dimension of a human life, the financial outcomes are real and significant. The Shokunin income premium is real. The Mottainai waste reduction is real. The Harahachi-bu lifestyle gap is real. The Tanuki layered saving system is real. The Omotenashi generosity compound effect is real. But the deepest truth about the Japanese wealth building system, the one that all 12 chapters have been building toward, is that the financial outcomes are not the primary point. They are the natural product of a life lived with awareness, purpose, patience, mastery, sufficiency, care, and generosity. A life that is, in the deepest sense of the Japanese philosophical tradition, a wealthy life, not because of what has been accumulated, but because of how it is lived. The wealth follows the life. Build the life. The wealth will come. Chapter 13, the one thing that makes all 12 habits work, and without which none of them do. Here's the final chapter, the short one. The one that doesn't introduce a new Japanese concept, or a new framework, or a new philosophical system to learn and implement. The one that says something simpler and more important than anything the previous 12 chapters contained. The one thing that makes all 12 Japanese habits work. The single condition without which kakeibo remains a notebook nobody opens. Ikigai remains a Venn diagram on a motivational poster. Mottainai remains an interesting cultural observation. Kaizen remains a business school concept. Hara Hachibu remains a dietary tip. Shokunin remains an aspirational identity. Ma remains empty space that fills itself immediately with whatever was waiting to fill it. Gamen remains a word for endurance that endurance alone can't sustain. The Tanuki layered savings system remains 3 bank accounts that never receive their automatic transfers. Wabi-sabi remains philosophical permission to be imperfect without improving, and Omotenashi remains a lovely idea about hospitality that never touches the professional practice, is this: the decision to begin. Not the decision to think about beginning. Not the decision to research which habit to begin with. Not the decision to wait until the current circumstances are slightly more conducive to beginning. Not the decision to begin after the holiday season, after the tax return arrives, after the job situation stabilizes, after the children are slightly older, after the market does whatever the market is currently being waited on to do. The actual, behavioral, this week, specific action decision to begin. Why beginning is the whole game. Here's the specific reason that beginning, the actual start, rather than the continued intention to start, is the condition on which everything else depends, stated in terms that are more concrete than the motivational framing usually provides. Every habit in this video is a compound practice. Its value is not in any single instance of it. Its value is in the accumulation of instances over time, the months of kakeibo entries that reveal the patterns no single month shows, the years of kaizen improvements that produce the capability that no single improvement creates, the decades of shokunin development that generate the mastery premium that no single year of deliberate practice produces. Compound practices require time to work, and the time they require begins only when the practice begins, not when the practice is planned, not when the practice is researched, not when the practice is considered and reconsidered and almost begun. When it actually begins, every day of non-beginning is a day of compound growth that cannot be recovered, not through working harder later, not through implementing the habits more intensively when conditions are better. The compound growth of the specific day that wasn't started is simply gone, added to the accumulation of the person who started and subtracted from the potential of the person who didn't. This is not a guilt-inducing observation. It is the mathematical reality of compound practices, stated plainly, because the plain statement is more useful than the motivational framing that softens it into something less actionable. The first specific action. Here's the specific, concrete, minimum viable beginning for each of the 12 habits this video described, the smallest possible action that constitutes a genuine start rather than a continued intention. For kakeibo, buy a small notebook today, write tomorrow's date on the first page, record tomorrow's first financial transaction by hand. That is the beginning. Not the perfect kakeibo system with all 4 categories and the monthly questions formatted correctly. The first handwritten transaction in a small notebook. That is the start. For ikigai, spend 20 minutes this week writing honest answers to 2 questions. What do I genuinely love? And what am I genuinely good at? Not the answers you think are correct, the honest ones. That is the beginning of the ikigai exploration that might take years to complete, but that cannot complete without beginning. For mottainai, identify one item in your home that you would normally replace and repair it instead. Or identify one food item that would normally be wasted and use it fully. One item. That is the beginning. For kaizen, identify the single smallest improvement to your current financial situation that could be made this week. Not the most important one. The most achievable one. Make it. That is the beginning. For hara hachibu, at your next meal, stop eating one portion earlier than you normally would. Notice the sufficiency. That is the beginning of the practice. Applied to spending in the same week, identify one spending category where you consumed more than genuine satisfaction required, and next time, stop at sufficiency. That is the financial beginning. For shokunin, spend 1 hour this week in deliberate practice of the skill most central to your professional value. Not comfortable practice, but practice at the edge of current capability. That is the beginning. For ma, clear one surface in your home to empty. Protect one half day in the next month's calendar from scheduling. Open one financial breathing room. Add $500 to savings before any discretionary spending this month. That is the beginning. For gammon, identify the single financial discipline you have been finding most difficult to maintain. Commit to maintaining it for 30 days regardless of how it feels. That is the beginning of the practice that 30 days will make more sustainable than the intention alone ever has. For ninjo, invest genuinely in one important relationship this week. Not a transactional interaction, but a genuine, unhurried, present investment of attention and care. That is the beginning. For the Tanuki layered savings system, open one named savings account this week. Transfer $100 into it. Name it. Specifically, emergency fund, or home purchase, or future. That is the beginning of the layered system that $100 will eventually demonstrate the value of. For wabi-sabi, identify one financial imperfection in your current situation, one way your financial life falls short of the ideal, and practice the specific acceptance of it as the honest starting point of a genuine journey, rather than as a failure to be overcome before the journey can begin. That acceptance is both the beginning and, in a sense, the whole practice. For omotenashi, do one thing this week for someone in your professional or personal life that is beyond what was asked, expected, or contracted, genuinely, without any calculation of return. Notice how it feels. That is the beginning. The system is ready. The question is you. Here's the final honest statement of this video, the one that 12 chapters of Japanese wisdom, financial philosophy, and specific practical guidance have been building toward. The Japanese wealth building system is complete. It has been working for generations of people in a culture that developed it and refined it over centuries. Its mathematical foundations, compound interest, savings rate, income growth through mastery, are universal. Its psychological foundations, awareness, patience, sufficiency, genuine engagement with work and with others, are available to anyone willing to develop them. Its practical implementations, the notebook, the named accounts, the deliberate practice hour, the cleared surface, the repaired instead of replaced, are available to anyone with a week and the willingness to begin. None of it requires exceptional intelligence. None of it requires exceptional income. None of it requires exceptional discipline in the sense of white-knuckling through constant temptation. It requires the specific, ordinary, unglamorous decision to begin, and then the specific, ordinary, unglamorous practice of continuing. Japan didn't build one of the world's highest household savings rates, one of the world's highest life expectancies, one of the world's most admired cultures of craft and quality through exceptional national talent or extraordinary circumstances. It built them through the consistent, daily, generational practice of exactly the habits this video described, applied by ordinary people in ordinary circumstances with the specific orientation toward awareness, sufficiency, mastery, patience, and genuine care for others that the habits produce and require. Those habits are yours to practice. The only thing they require from you is the one thing that no video, no framework, no philosophy, and no amount of knowledge can provide on your behalf. The decision to begin. Make it today. Conclusion. Let's bring the full picture into focus. You came to this video with a question embedded in the title: what Japanese habits create long-term wealth? And the answer has been the substance of 9 chapters that collectively describe something more than a list of financial practices. They describe a coherent philosophy of living, a way of relating to money, to work, to objects, to time, to other people, and to the future, that produces financial outcomes as a natural consequence rather than as a forced result of discipline imposed on an otherwise unchanged life. Here's the synthesis. The Japanese wealth-building system is not primarily about saving more of the money you earn, though it produces that outcome. It is about developing a relationship with every dimension of your economic life: your work, your consumption, your possessions, your time, your relationships, your financial infrastructure, that is characterized by awareness, intentionality, sufficiency, mastery, and patience. The financial outcomes are the natural product of this relationship rather than the target of a set of behavioral rules imposed on a lifestyle that remains oriented differently. Kakeibo produces awareness, ikigai produces purpose, mottainai produces respect for value, kaizen produces improvement, harahachi-bu produces sufficiency, shokunin produces mastery, ma produces space, gamen produces patience, ninjo produces connection, and the system they form together produces wealth, not as a destination to be arrived at through discipline and sacrifice, but as the natural accumulation of a life lived with the specific combination of awareness, intentionality, and patience that the Japanese cultural framework has developed and refined over generations. Here's the most honest thing to say about these practices. They are not quick. None of them produce dramatic short-term results in the way that financial content typically promises. Kakeibo produces awareness in the first month but changes behavior gradually over months and years. Ikigai produces clarity incrementally over a long and sometimes uncomfortable period of honest exploration. Shokunin mastery develops over years of deliberate practice before the income premium becomes significant. Ma requires the sustained resistance to the filling of space impulse that modern consumer culture perpetually reinforces. But here's the corresponding honest observation. They are real. The outcomes they produce are documented in the financial lives of the people and the culture that embodies them. The Okinawan centenarian whose financial resilience is as remarkable as their longevity. The Japanese craftsperson whose mastery commands premium compensation through every economic cycle. The Japanese household whose savings rate exceeds the Western equivalent despite lower average income in many categories. The financial culture that rebuilt an economy devastated by war into one of the most financially sophisticated and resilient in the world, through the specific application of exactly the practices this video has described. The practices work, they have always worked, they will continue working for the people who implement them. Not because Japan has some financial magic unavailable to the rest of the world, but because the practices are aligned with the specific mathematical, psychological, and behavioral realities of how wealth accumulates that are universal rather than cultural. The culture made them visible. The mathematics makes them work. The implementation is yours to choose. Pick one practice. Start this week. Apply the kaizen principle to the implementation. One practice, implemented imperfectly, improved continuously, and trust the compound growth of behavioral change to produce the compound growth of financial outcomes. The Japanese habit of patient, continuous, quality-oriented progress has been building wealth for centuries. It is available to you right now, in whatever financial situation you're currently in, with whatever resources you currently have. The only question is whether you're willing to start. Begin.